will the genetically engineered tree plantation of the future look like? Well, if we combine all of the impacts of all of the different traits that they're engineering these trees for, what we can imagine is what we'll have is, let's say the plantation is 1,000 acres in size. It's directly adjacent to native wild forests. Because it's been engineered to be insect resistant, there are no insects whatsoever. Because it's been engineered to be herbicide resistant, it's been heavily contaminated with toxic chemicals. There are no understory plants at all. Because they've been engineered to be sterile, a good 95% of the trees have no fruit, no nuts, no seeds, no pollen, no flowers, no food of any kind for wildlife. So there's no wildlife in this plantation. The other 5% that aren't sterile are contaminating the surrounding native forests with these traits. So those forests are now becoming inhospitable to wildlife. In addition, because many of the trees are sterile, the energy that would have gone into reproduction is going into faster growth. So you're ending up with trees that are very rapidly diminishing the groundwater, very rapidly diminishing the soils, and that in only 20 to 30 years will have completely desertified the land, which means that now you have 1,000 acres of desert, and now they have to go cut down the native forest next door to have another 1,000 acres to reestablish a new plantation.
There are test plots of genetically engineered trees being grown in about 100, 150 locations all over the United States right now. Many of these are outdoor plots that can affect our own forests, that can affect the integrity of land that people already depend on. There are farmers in northern Michigan where there's GE tree research going on, whose own land is potentially being contaminated already by experimental plots of genetically engineered trees.
Organic papaya growers on the Big Island of Hawaii have lost their certification because of contamination from the genetically engineered plants.
The Big Island composite was 80% organic and 20% wild or backyard garden papayas. In this sample, the overall GMO contamination level was about 50%.
Hi, my name is Toy. I've been a Big Island farmer, organic farmer, for over 6 years. My family farm recently found out we had GMO contamination on our 170 tree papaya orchard. Test results showed no GMO trees. Oh, what's going on here? However, the seeds inside the papaya fruit tested positive for GMO contamination. Somehow, GMO airborne pollen had contaminated the papaya seed in the fruit on these non-GMO trees. GMO pollen from an unknown airborne source has ruined our entire papaya crop. Because of my integrity as an organic farmer, I had no choice but to cut down all 170 trees. That's 170 trees. We lost, number one, our own seed stock, and number two, thousands of dollars in papaya sales.
In my opinion, we have not studied these things carefully enough before release, especially to the open field. And after today's finding about how widespread these things are, it just raises my concern that much more. When we make a mistake medically, we recall the product. Can you recall this? Thank you.
The spread of genetic material has legal implications for landowners and for public lands. Recent legal cases suggest that contaminated trees will become the property of the corporation that patented their genetically engineered genes, regardless of whether those trees are on public or private land. A look at what has happened to farmers like Percy Schmeiser offers a preview of what could happen if genetically engineered traits contaminate our forests.
When Monsanto laid the lawsuit against me, they admitted it was a test case and they wanted to see how far they could exercise through patent law control over a farmer regardless of how the seed gets into a farmer's field. And the judge, after 2.5 weeks of trial, what he ruled is what startled property owners and farmers throughout the world when he ruled it does not matter how any of Monsanto's GMO seeds or plants, in this case canola, gets onto a farmer's field. And he went on so far to specify how this could happen: cross-pollination, direct seed movement, by wind, by birds, by floods, etc. It doesn't matter how it gets there, destroying your crop. All of your crop becomes Monsanto's ownership, and they can lay a lawsuit on top of it against you. Even if the contamination rate is 1%, all your other 99% of your crop goes to Monsanto. And that's what startled the world, how farmers could lose their rights overnight. An organic farmer could lose his seeds and his rights overnight and get subject to a lawsuit. What this all means with this patent laws that Monsanto has on life-giving forms such as a gene is that if they're saying that if they put one gene into any life form, a seed or a plant, they have invented that seed or a plant. That means that if a gene gets into any species of trees, the person who has those trees or the government, it no longer belongs to them, it belongs to Monsanto. Because once the gene gets in, they say they have invented that seed, they have invented that plant, they have invented that gene, or that tree, with just one gene in it. And that's how serious this whole issue of GMOs are. It's not only the issue of food and the environment, but it's the whole issue of control of all our natural resources, including seeds and plants.
So the genetic engineering adds a whole new layer to that, where trees will be produced essentially by companies in the lab, be intellectual property, and then could escape onto our public lands. What does that mean? Would a corporation have the right to go onto the public land and say, well, that's my tree, I produced it in my laboratory, I get to cut it down? Does it mean they get to drive a road into the wilderness, or the public has to pay for a road into a wilderness area that's never been logged because some pollen fell into that forest and now a tree has grown up in that forest that was once a national park perhaps, like Yellowstone or Yosemite? These are huge issues, and this is a public debate that we need to have.
This public debate will need to answer some difficult questions. Can life be owned? If a corporation changes one gene in a tree, does it own that tree and all the trees it contaminates? Is life a commodity? I feel it is very important for scientists to engage in public discussions about the significance and implications of their work, especially in the case of genetic engineering, when we will all be impacted.
When we're talking about the privatization of life itself for private profit, we're talking about a very radical economic, political and social agenda which runs completely counter to the values and worldviews of many Indigenous communities, communities in the South, and frankly most right-thinking people, I think, right around the world, who would see life as being much more than something that can just be bought and sold and manipulated by a few private companies for their own profit.
Genetically engineered trees are being targeted to where labor and land is cheap and the growing seasons long, particularly the global South. Central and South America, Mexico, China, Indonesia, Africa, and New Zealand, as well as the southern United States. These places are already subject to the negative impacts of plantation-style tree farming. Fast-growing GE tree plantations threaten to worsen these problems, using up precious water needed for other crops and livestock.
The water levels are affected because of the eucalyptus. Small streams are disappearing and the soil gets dry and hard. You can see for yourself. Even after it rains, the soil dries up very quickly. Before, it used to retain the water for 10 to 20 days. Not